The Pelican season is over, and rumors are swirling that both David Griffin and Willie Green will be fired. Is a new era starting for the Pelicans? We're going to cover it all in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all on this, Sunday afternoon when I'm recording this, and there are rumors swirling around David Griffin and Willie Green. Are they going to be fired? It feels like that might be the case. We're going to break the rumors down, where they're coming from. One person in particular I really trust on this sort of thing, where things went wrong this season, and the other big questions remaining as the Pelican season is now mercifully, officially over with their loss to the Oklahoma City Thunder. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $250 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. And of course, don't forget about the Locked On Pelicans daily newsletter. There are prizes if you subscribe between April 7th, 2025 and April 30th, 2025, including a $2,500 Best Buy gift card to upgrade your sports viewing situation here. So go subscribe wherever go subscribe over at it's lockedondaily.com or the links in the description down below. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday. We will continue to be Monday through Friday here. I got a whole lot of stuff to talk about. Looks like it's going to be a busy week. Even if it's not a busy week, there's a lot to really talk about in debriefing this Pelican season. And we're going to start breaking it all down here. So subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. If you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. So let's get into kind of the big news here. David Griffin, Willie Green, are they going to be gone? I have gotten this version of, some sort of this question for the past month or two on every, TV appearance that I've done, every radio appearance I've done, and I do a lot of those. Everyone's been asking, and everyone asks about Willie Green. Will he be back? Will he be back? And on the Ultimate New Orleans Sports Show and on Fox 8 recently, I've said on both of those, the question should not be Willie Green. The question should be, is David Griffin coming back or not? And that's where I want to start here. And per Mark Stein's Substack newsletter, where Jake Fisher is a writer for him, they had an email go out looking at kind of where things stand. And as of today, when you look at it, I'm trying to find it, and maybe I accidentally deleted it, which I think is annoying. But basically in there, they talked about how there was a lot of smoke around the NBA and the Pelicans, and I'll read it here. I just found it. The weekend was dominated by buzz about the Pelicans and mounting uncertainty about the futures of lead executive David Griffin and head coach Willie Green after a 21-win season that was again derailed by numerous injuries. More on the injuries, by the way, in the next segment here. Quote, this is Griffin's sixth season in charge, and there are some in New Orleans league sources say who are undeniably bracing for his exit, with Green's status also tenuous. Griffin has found numerous draft gems since selecting Zion Williamson number 1 overall at the beginning of his tenure, including promising two-way swingman Trey Murphy, defensive ace Herb Jones, last summer's center Yves Missi. He also brought back riches in trades that sent Anthony Davis to the Lakers, Drew Holiday to the Bucks, that helped those teams win titles. Yet the aforementioned injuries have repeatedly overwhelmed the rosters that have appeared to have playoff potential. And even he goes in on DeJounte Murray and all of those things. All of that doesn't really matter here. So he goes on to say, and this is an important part of something that we're going to talk about a lot this coming week, that, as Dyson Daniels has emerged as a Defensive Player of the Year candidate, his rise has been a source of tension in the organization this season, with Green facing questions internally about his perceived past preferences for playing pesky guard Jose Alvarado rather than Daniels. Yet it must be noted that there were whispers about Green being in danger during the Pelicans' brutal 5-29 start, especially after New Orleans brought in former head coach Hornets head coach James Borrego as Green's associate head coach, but he survived them. Green has been known to hold significant support from Pelicans owner Gail Benson. I'm not going to read the rest of it. You really should subscribe to the Mark Stein Substack. That is probably my favorite one that I subscribe to. I pay for it. It's well worth it. Keep that line in mind of Green has, support from Pelicans owner Gail Benson here. Look, the question is not Willie Green. The question is David Griffin. And the reason is because alignment. And this is something that the everydayers have heard me talk about in previous shows. You need your front office and your head coach to be aligned and to be on the same page. And while I don't think they are not currently, if you get rid of one of them, are they going to be going forward? And here's why I say the question is more about David Griffin. If you fire Willie Green, you're letting David Griffin pick the next head coach. And look, this would be his third head coach that he's hired, the fourth head coach under him. He inherited Alvin Gentry. I'm not going to hold Alvin Gentry against him for that. That was forced by ownership. And keep that in mind here. So if he hires a new head coach, you need to make sure that David Griffin and the new head coach are synced up in terms of their contracts. This can't be you hire the next head coach. Let's say it's Sam Cassell, who I'm big on. You hire Sam Cassell. He's your head coach. David Griffin next year is your GM, your vice president of basketball operations. And say the season goes wrong, injuries, whatever. It might be anything. And then you decide to fire David Griffin. So a year after that, you bring in a new GM to oversee that. And they're inheriting Sam Cassell. And that's just not how you do it. The new lead basketball decision maker wants to hire their own guy. So now in a year, they're going to fire Sam Cassell after, then 2 years in charge. And we're going through this whole song and dance again. If you fire David Griffin, your new executive can come in and fire Willie Green and needs to be allowed to fire Willie Green if that's the decision that person wants to make. This can't be you fire David Griffin, hire somebody else. Look, we'll use Joe Dumars as an example because that name's always going to come up in here, even if I think that would be the wrong decision. And I don't think it's truthful. Say they hire Joe Dumars and he inherits Willie Green. He doesn't want Willie Green, but ownership is like, we like him, keep Willie Green. And in a year, what is Joe Dumars going to do? He's going to fire Willie Green and then hire the head coach that he wants to hire for this job. And so you've then wasted a year. You need everyone in alignment on this. So because of that, by unsyncing your lead basketball decision maker, GM, executive vice president of basketball operations, whatever the freaking title is going to be, then by unsyncing everything, I just got a text, sorry. Unsyncing everything, it sets you back an extra year or two, and you can't do that here. And that's what you want to avoid. And you've seen the disconnect between the front office and coach in Memphis, in Denver, and that just leads to bad situations all around. You can't do that sort of thing. So if that's what you do, you need to make sure those two spots, head coach and let's call it a vice president of basketball operations, need to be synced up, linked, and in alignment about what's going on. We're going to talk more about this later in the week of like the two timelines thing that you've seen certain NBA teams try and do, and it just doesn't work out. And it leads to the situation like giving up on a guy like Dyson Daniels, who's gone on to do really good things, especially he's even a better defender than what he was here in New Orleans. But also that leads to how he ended up succeeding. And that's tied to this around Willie Green and David Griffin and not having a clear vision for what you're necessarily trying to execute, or even if they do, injuries have derailed all of that. So there are rumors swirling. I can tell you the chatter behind the scenes in league circles is certainly like these two are going to be gone. I don't know if that for sure is going to be the case. Look, it does feel like this team just needs to have a massive shakeup in some capacity. The easiest thing to do is a head coach and a front office and just hire new people. And look, I think the process has been okay here with what they've tried to do somewhat. We'll look at some of the misses here in the next segment about why maybe you do need to just fully clean house no matter what. But regardless, this is a results-oriented business and the results have to matter, and the results have not been good for a variety of reasons. That's not all on Willie Green, not all on David Griffin, not all on the players either, but everyone shares some blame in this. And if that's the case, you still need to get results and you're not getting them. And if you just run this all back next year, do you feel the results are going to be different? Because look, and I'll tell you this, they weren't particularly great when they were healthy too. Now, maybe that's because they only got kind of fully healthy in the middle of the season, but you could see they weren't going to be world beaters or anything like that. And while they were on paper a talented team, this doesn't look like a team that would have made tons and tons of noise in the postseason. So going forward, whatever happens, firing David Griffin, firing Willie Green, bringing in new people, keeping them or not, you need to have a clear vision of what they're trying to do, and people need to be allowed to go out and execute it. And those are going to be things we're going to be talking about later in the week here, because we're going to look at team building and things like that about where this team goes from here. So coming up next, let's get into some of the biggest reasons of why this season was a failure, but it's maybe not what you think. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Prize Picks. Basketball and hockey playoffs are heating up, and there's no better way to turn your sports knowledge into real rewards than with Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy. With Prize Picks, it's simple. You pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and you're in. You can even combine players across sports, basketball, hockey, and baseball, or others, for your chance to win up to, get this number, 2,000 times your cash. Luka Doncic for more than 28 points in Game 1. Jason Tatum for more than 8 rebounds in Game 1. Hockey, you can get in on the action too. They have fun promos like Taco Tuesday and others where they discount player projections for up to 25% for even more value. And the payouts are fast, safe, and secure. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is also brought to you by Wayfair. Spring is here, and that means it's home project season. So whether you're trying to refresh a room or tackling a full renovation, Wayfair is the best kept secret for all things home improvement. From small updates like stylish cabinet hardware to major upgrades like new vanities, sinks, outdoor lighting, Wayfair has quality products for every budget. I've redone a kitchen before by just replacing all like the cabinet handles, changing the faucet and the sink. It makes a world of difference. It customizes your home to make it like yours, and you can get everything on Wayfair. That's where I do all of my shopping for my home. Fast and free shipping makes it so easy. You don't need to haul heavy items from the store, anything like that. Maybe you don't even have a truck to be able to do that. And I love that they have top brands like GE, Moen, all at great prices. And you're going to be able to find exactly what you want for your space. And it's just super easy. It's really what it is with Wayfair. So Wayfair makes home improvement easy. Get started now at wayfair.com. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. If you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. And don't forget about the daily Locked On Pelicans newsletter. Future can still be pretty bright for this team, and this draft is going to be really interesting, and there's a lot of big questions, and we'll get to the big questions in the next segment here, what's still kind of remaining. There's a lot of big decisions to be made around the New Orleans Pelicans here. We're going to be covering all over at the Locked On Pelicans newsletter, so stay ahead of the game here and get all the offseason insight. Plus, you could win big by subscribing. Subscribe between April 7th, 2025 and April 30th, 2025 for a chance to win one of these amazing prizes. A $2,500 Best Buy gift card, a $300 Game Time gift card for tickets, or $200 to Fanatics to buy a New Jersey, maybe of Cooper Flag, hopefully. Get exclusive insights into free agency draft coverage and more delivered straight to your inbox. Join the Locked On Pelicans podcast daily newsletter for trusted coverage every day. Subscribe below by clicking on the link or go to lockedondaily.com. Okay, let's keep looking at, potentially David Griffin and others being fired here. And I think there's a very realistic chance of that happening somewhat soon. Might not be. I think they're going to really take a moment to evaluate. You want to give yourself some time to breathe when making this decision. So keep that in mind when it comes to it here. But it does feel like big shakeups in some capacity need to happen, at least with coaching and front office, maybe even with the players in Zion Williamson. And we'll look at that later in the week too. So I want to look at a couple of things about some big failures with this team, right? If you talk to a lot of people around the league, NBA experts, others, they seem to really like David Griffin, and probably they're about split 50-50 on Willie Green. But overall, David Griffin is thought of pretty highly. And, they see injuries as the reason for the bad season. David Griffin's not at fault necessarily, though I think he has some hand in this to a degree of Zion Williamson missing all the time that he has, only playing 30 games this season, right? No, the broken hand for DeJounte Murray and then the Achilles injury are just fluke things. Same with the injury to Trey Murphy. And all of those things were kind of what derailed this season, right? It was injuries that derailed the season more so than anything else. I truly believe that. So people kind of look at, hey, they're doing good things. It's just injuries keep happening, and that's some bad luck. And as I've said before, it's, you flip a coin a bunch. It can come up heads 100 times in a row. Unlikely, yes, but it can happen. And that feels like just what's happening to New Orleans, just an extended run overall of bad luck. But there are some pretty damning failures this season for the New Orleans Pelicans, and even recently around the team that I don't think you can fully ignore when it comes to it. And so when people use injuries as an excuse, like, yes, believe me, I get it. I fully get it. But I don't think it's just that. And that's where I think the injury excuse can only take you so far. It can take you pretty far, but I don't know if it can take you all the way to everyone should get a pass this season. Because even when they were healthy, there were big issues here. And we can start with defensive rebounding. We knew center was going to be a problem going into the season, and that was likely going to mean that defensive rebounding was going to be a problem this season. And for a chunk of the year, the Pelicans were historically bad. Not just bad, but historically bad as a defensive rebounding unit. They finished 27th in the league. You're not going to win games when that's the case. The defense just straight up fell off of a cliff this year. You traded away Dyson Daniels, who wasn't the key to it last season. Herb Jones got hurt. That's a big part of it too. But even moving someone like Larry Nance Jr. in that trade for DeJounte Murray actively hurt the team when it came to them trying to kind of be a good defensive unit, losing that some of like switchability and things. And that's a big part of the problem here. They have tried to upgrade the center spot for years now. Looking at it, like the team, David Griffin, the team has tried. The problem is trying's not enough. You got to get results. Look, they've come very, very close to acquiring Jared Allen multiple times. Like very close multiple times to acquiring Jared Allen. It just never came to fruition. But at a certain point, so what, right? We've said the results have to matter. Just because you almost got a guy doesn't necessarily mean anything. And if that's the case, well, you're judged on the results, not what you almost pulled off. Otherwise, Danny Ainge would be the best GM all time. I almost traded for that guy, right? Like that was the running joke. So if that's the case, well, you need to, so I'm trying to pull lineup data and I just completely put in the wrong thing, which is kind of funny here. You just have to get it done, and being close doesn't matter, right? Like you're judged on, did you make the deal or not who did you almost try and acquire? And if you didn't do it, you failed, and it's as simple as that. So there's, that kind of factor into it, and something that I think we've got to look at with it. The other thing is at times they weren't particularly great when they were healthy. That's the thing. When you had DeJounte Murray, Zion Williamson, and Trey Murphy on the court, you had a plus 4.7 net rating. That's fine. That's not an elite net rating or anything like that. And that's not particularly great. And it was such a small sample size that those numbers could have swung either way. So even when guys were healthy, it still looked like they weren't particularly good, right? That's still the worst defensive rebounding team when you had certain guys out there on the court, and that's going to cause you to lose games over the long run. So when you look at it, yeah, there's maybe been a good process here overall, but again, you're judged on the results. And there's some pretty damning failures. The defensive rebounding, not looking like an explosive elite playoff team when fully healthy, right? Look, Brandon Ingram has kind of been a point of contention. They held on to him too long. It's as simple as that. They held on to him too long. They got as good of a return as they could get for him this year. But once he went down with that injury, it was like he's never going to play again. I was telling y'all early on in that injury, I don't think he's ever playing again for this team. Whether he was going to be on the roster or not, I did not think he was going to play again. Lo and behold, what happened here? They botched that. They should have traded him probably 2 years ago. We have hindsight on that, but when you're a GM, you need to kind of be more forward thinking about what this is going to do to a team. There are some pretty damning failures when it comes to it, right? when you're kind of constantly in win now mode, you struggle to develop some of your young guys. And since they've drafted Zion Williamson and they did not commit to a slightly longer rebuild, trying to push, right? David Griffin's press conference of like, we're here to beat people's asses and things like that, right? Around this is Drew Holiday's team and all that, a more patient rebuild, and maybe ownership has a factor into this too. You don't get to watch guys like Dyson Daniels develop when Willie Green is trying to make the postseason and Dyson screws up, and we'll do a whole show on this sort of thing. You yank him. And one of the things that he has said, and this is a big point to me, he's basically was saying, like, I went to Atlanta and I didn't have to like look over my shoulder and see if I was going to get yanked from the game if I made a slight mistake like Willie Green was doing. These coaches that are in win now mode are kind of playing vets, right? Michael Malone was doing that in Denver, and that was a big point of contention between him and their GM, Calvin Booth. Both of those guys, by the way, have ties to New Orleans and have worked here before, coached or been in the front office. Taylor Jenkins and their team with the Memphis Grizzlies at odds with the GM over like Zach Edey, a rookie. Well, when you're trying to win, if Zach Edey's not helping you win, he's going to get benched. But if the GM wants him to play for that guy to develop or what have you, that's a big problem. And this goes to what we just talked about in the last segment about alignment there. If this team does clear house, and we'll kind of focus on this tomorrow unless news comes out or something, hypothetically, if you clean house and you hire a new executive, it's like executive vice president of basketball operations says, it feels annoying to say, but it's above GM works below him. You get the point that I'm trying to make here. We got to figure out a better word for that. You hire a new lead basketball decision maker. Like, they need to have a vision of, we're rebuilding or we're going for it. And then you act accordingly and you make sure your head coach is on the same page with that sort of thing. That's really important to me. And it feels like there are multiple goals trying to be met here, and that's not great. It doesn't mean that you forget entirely about development, but maybe it costs you a win here and there to make sure that the right guys are playing for that sort of thing to kind of grow for the future too. And the Pelicans feel like they lost sight of some of that, and it's, maybe cost them some of the future when it comes to some of the players that they have, right? You've seen Willie Green be way too stubborn with certain players, and they're not developing, they're not growing because of that. We got lucky with Trey Murphy, but he was stuck on the bench when it came to everything, right? And that was not great early on in his tenure. So you can see there's reasons to clear house with both of them. There's reasons not to too. The injuries are a big factor into this, right? Willie Green can't make Zion Williamson play more than 30 games. And if Zion was playing, that would go a long way towards not having the season that we just saw here in New Orleans. So let's look at a couple other big questions here that I want to look at that we're going to be kind of left open-ended, and we'll get some answers on hopefully soon. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. We got the play-in tournament coming up. These games are actually some of my favorite in the league. And FanDuel has given new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you're going to get $250 in bonus bets if you win. I love how FanDuel makes betting so easy, whether it's picking your favorite team to advance in the playoffs or just diving into player props. So from 3-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuel has so many ways to bet on your favorite player props. And after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. So don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today after you place your first $5 bet if your bet wins. That's FanDuel.com for $250 in bonus bets. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everyday or listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast here. And don't forget about the Locked On Pelicans daily newsletter and, of course, Locked On Saints. What is going on with the ninth pick and Derek Carr's injury? Seems like some kind of big news there. Ross Jackson of Locked On Saints, making sense of everything black and gold. Go subscribe to the Locked On Saints podcast wherever you get your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we're waiting on news of if Willie Green is going to come back, if David Griffin is going to come back. And I need to put my phone away. So we'll find out this week. The Pelicans shouldn't take long to make a decision, a day or two at the most. And if we don't hear that, we kind of assume that they're going to be coming back. And look, I can tell you the front office and the coaching staff is operating business as usual. They are not acting like they're being fired from people I talked to in the front office today. They're just operating business as usual, starting to kind of help the players develop off-season plans for the things that they need to work on, finalizing the draft board, finalizing all of that stuff, scouting and all that. All that's going to be in full swing. So you got to make a decision now, especially because the Pelicans are going to be in a unique position, looking at a top 4 pick, hopefully, in this upcoming NBA draft. But there's a couple of other big questions, I think, still swirling around the team right now. First and foremost to me is, what are you going to do about Zion Williamson? He looked incredible when he played. Looked like a dude that can be the number 1 guy on a championship team, was an absolute force. But he only played 30 games. It's exhausting. The potential is there, but the injuries keep happening. He wasn't ready to start the season. You could see it. He wasn't in game shape or anything like that. And it only took later for him to kind of get to that point. Is that going to be the same thing we do every year? Is this the year it finally clicks? Finally. I'm not going to get into the personal life stuff because I don't think that really matters here. And that just looks, the whole situation to me just is kind of sad. And I hate to see whatever is going on with that kind of stuff, truthfully. So we're going to save that for right now, unless it balloons into something bigger and becomes a concern. But is he going to do the right things this offseason, or is he not? Because it needs to happen this offseason. It's needed to already happen, and it hasn't. Is this a year that he's going to do it? If not, it's time to pull the plug on this. And if they fire David Griffin, or even if they keep David Griffin, you need to make that kind of determination. This goes to, what is your plan going forward? What's the plan going forward? What's the vision? And it needs to be executed. If the vision is, we hope Zion gets it together, that's not good enough. That's not good enough here. You can't hope. There need to be actionable items on this, things that you can do, can control. Hoping Zion does the right things is not it. That's the big question here. Is there a Zion trade? If you do a Zion trade, then is it a complete teardown? And look, I'm going to say something a lot of y'all aren't going to like. If you do a complete teardown, a full-on rebuild, and we will do a whole show on this, you have to move not just Zion Williamson, CJ McCollum, DeJounte Murray. You also have to probably move Herb Jones and Trey Murphy. You really need to do that too, because their values are kind of at an all-time high right now when you look at their contractual situations here. And we'll do that more. That's not popular, right? I love both of those players on this team. But if you're going to do a complete teardown, it's going to be painful, but you got to do it. Or go for the playoffs, right? If it's like, we're going to contend next year, you got 2 more years with Zion before you need to really worry about this. Really 1 year with Zion before you need to worry about this. Does that mean you trade your top 4 pick depending on where it lands in the draft? That's a factor here too. Those are some real big questions. If you fire David Griffin and Willie Green, are you going to commit to spending on a good head coach? I don't think this is the worst ownership group in the NBA at all, not even close to it. I don't even think they're the cheapest per se, right? They spent a lot of money on facility upgrades and things like that. Hiring David Griffin wasn't cheap. Hiring Trajan Langdon in the first place wasn't cheap, right? They were interviewing Langdon for Griff's job. To get him, hire him, and have him work under Griff, you had to pay him for that sort of thing. They spent money on the front office, and this front office has gotten ownership to spend money going forward. But if you want Michael Malone, if you want Mike Brown, if you want Taylor Jenkins, those guys are going to be in the realm of $10 million per year. That is the going rate for a very good NBA head coach. Are you going to do that, or are you going to cheap out and go with an unproven guy? And that can be fine too. There's nothing wrong with going with the young, unproven guy that you think has a high ceiling to be a good head coach. I can think of a couple off the top of my head. Or are you just going to go cheap and try and do this as cheaply as possible, right? That's kind of the big question to me here, is how much are they going to invest in the next head coach, and what does that look like? Because Willie Green is not one of the highest paid head coaches in the league at all. And so are you willing to pay to really contend, at least in that realm? That's a big question to me. I don't know if they're going to do that or not. We know they're not going to pay the luxury tax unless there's a reason to pay the luxury tax. And even then, you're going to get maybe 1 year of that. But you need to kind of decide we've talked about kind of the vision. Have a vision. Decide what you're going to do next year. Ownership needs to decide what you want to. Is kind of just making the playoffs every year good enough? Or do you really want to go for it or not? Do you want a rebuild that kind of resets you, or do you just want the playoff potential revenue? I don't think there's a right or wrong answer when it comes to this sort of thing, but you need to pick a direction and go from there. What other big questions do you have? Let me know in the comments down below here on YouTube, and we'll probably be talking about those this week. I was literally at the game, writing down show ideas for probably about 2 weeks worth of shows, and that's before any potential news breaks. And we don't know if it is or not. I don't know for sure if they're firing anybody or not here, but the winds seem to be blowing in that area. And that's going to make it an even more interesting offseason for the New Orleans Pelicans. And that's why you need to subscribe to Locked On Pelicans wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as well. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And don't forget about the newsletter over at lockedondaily.com or the link in the description down below. And look, final thing I want to say here is thank you. Thank you for tuning in throughout the season. It has been legitimately unfun. It's not been a fun season. I love basketball. I love watching these guys play. I just love good basketball in general. It's not been fun. I think that is safe to say. We made it through the season. The offseason looks to be really interesting, and we're going to be covering it all here on the Locked On Pelicans podcast. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison. Again, I really appreciate y'all tuning in a season where you don't really need to. I get it. But those of you who are the everydayers who stuck it out, thank you. There's a lot more to come. We're still going to be 5 days a week for the foreseeable future. We're not dropping anytime soon. We're going to have a lot to cover here on the Locked On Pelicans podcast. So always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. And I'll be back with y'all tomorrow.